what were some of the thoughts that were percolating in your mind and germinating in your mind and Tony Payne's mind over the years that caused you at some point to sit down and say, you know, we need to write a book about ministry called The Trellis and The Vine? How did we get to that point?
Yeah, because there's just not enough books on ministry, are there?
Just a few.
We thought there needed to be one more book. I think it actually goes back to this apprenticeship that I was running called MTS, the Ministry Training Strategy, which I was involved in for 15 years or so. And the short explanation is it was and still is today a 2-year apprenticeship for men and women who are praying and thinking about a life of ministry and preaching the gospel and working in churches. Our particular apprenticeship happened before seminary. So it's a bit odd, but that's the way we're doing it. It works in our Australian context. And it was catching on in Australia in churches, not just in our own church, but in other churches. And ministers would say to us, would you send us an apprentice to train? And this would happen quite often. And I realised they were asking that because they had no one they thought they could train for the ministry of the word from within their own congregation. And as we thought about that and talked to them, and talked to hundreds of them and personally and in conferences and so forth, we found they weren't equipping the members of their church to be involved in the ministry of the word. So there's lots of activities, lots of leadership, lots of organisation, but very few members of the church were equipped in the personal ministries of the word, the visiting ministries, the small group ministries. And so they weren't seeing bubbling up from within their congregation those who could potentially be full-time missionaries or full-time teachers or full-time. So in MTS, we had to go to the next level of equipping pastors to be doing a lot of training and encouragement of word ministries right across the congregation. And I think that was, just thinking about your question there, I think that was a big impetus for me in putting together the Trellis and Vine as a way of talking about everyone being involved in word ministries in different ways with their different gifts and opportunities, which is the vine work in the metaphor.
From what you're saying, it sounds like what you identified was there's a gap in the church. And it sounds like one of the major gaps is that there still tends to often be a tendency in the Western church for word ministry to be something the paid pastor does. He's the professional, he's paid for it, he has the education, he has the knowledge, he's been to seminary, and so on. And so I will support that, I'll pray for him, I might write a check, I might lead a small group, but really the ministry of the word is something he does. So it sounds like you saw that gap, is that right?
That's right.
So why do you think that gap exists?
Well, it's exactly right to have ministers of the word who are the shepherds of the flock, preaching on Sunday, preparing great sermons, and shepherding the flock through the public preaching of the word. So we don't want to do anything or say anything to diminish that ministry. In fact, you can't train other members to be ministers of the word if the preaching ministry is not strong. But as we look at the whole idea of being a disciple, the whole idea of the body working together in love to build itself up through the life of Christ coming into the body through the Spirit, there's a lot more mutual ministry of the word that's in the New Testament. There's big theological principles of the priesthood of all believers. All believers are able to bring the message of the gospel to others. We're not priests in the sense of being mediators between man and God, but we do have this service ministry to others of the Word of God. And the power and influence and authority is in the Word of God, not in whether it's from the pulpit or from the lounge chair or so forth. So we wanted to bring the two together. And that comes a lot out of my own ministry history, where I was involved in St. Matthias Church in Australia, in Sydney. Wasn't doing a lot of the preaching, that was being done by Philip Jensen and others. But I was doing a lot of the encouragement and equipping of small group leaders and those who are doing one-to-one ministry and bringing that public ministry and the private ministry together. And I think that's just been missed somehow. I think it's been missed biblically in some ways. It's only the pulpit ministry is the teaching ministry. And we've really got to keep thinking about that reformation of the every member ministry. And not just ministry in terms of being on rosters, but ministries of the word to each other. All those words in the New Testament, encouraging and admonishing and encouraging one another. The teaching ministries that are not just the formal teaching ministries, but the personal teaching ministries. The 2 Corinthians 1 of comforting those with the gospel, with the comfort we have received from the gospel. So a lot of that's very informal. It's the visiting of those who need help. It's the regular meetings with people in small groups and one-to-one. That's the kind of discipling community that we want to see happening in churches.